Alrighty, why don't we get started? So thank you everyone for joining this presentation. I'm really excited to talk to you about powerful storytelling on social media. Just let me, this is my, just, sorry, working and figuring out the controls. I just thought I'd introduce myself. I'm Tamara Beluja. I'm CBC British Columbia's social media editor. I've been working in this role for about 5 years now, and I've previously worked as a journalist for the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Newstalk 1010 in Toronto, and I've also recently been the Michener-Deakin Fellow for Journalism Education at the University of British Columbia. And in that specific role, I was working with students in the School of Journalism at UBC to really sort of think through how you can tell stories on social media and how you should be thinking about social media. I will say that a lot of my ideas and thoughts are journalism focused, and I understand that there are a lot of people who might be listening in who are coming from different backgrounds like marketing or PR, blogging. And so I hope that you'll find some of these examples, which I apologize are all journalism based because that's what I'm familiar with and that's what I do. But I think that you'll be able to find some uses from these examples and find ways to apply them in whatever aspect of storytelling you do on social media. The principles that I will be sharing with you are pretty much the same, even if you aren't working as a journalist. And I should also say that if you have any questions at any point, just feel free to put them in the chat. I am keeping an eye on it, and you know, I'm more than happy to take your questions as it makes sense, but we can also do a little bit of a session at the end as well as a Q&A. So let's get started. So when we're talking about social media, I think it's important to establish in sort of very base terms why it matters. And I really think that the numbers here speak for themselves. I mean, 2 billion users on Facebook, about the same on YouTube, 300 million on Twitter, and 100 million on Instagram. These numbers are accurate as of earlier this year, but you know, it kind of gives you a picture of what's going on. And when I look at these audience numbers, what you're really seeing there is the potential to reach people who maybe don't necessarily know whatever brand you have, whether it's, you know, the CBC or whether it's something else that you're working on. They might not know the brand, but they might still be able to find your content on social media. And the other thing about social media audiences, especially when you look at YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram, even some of the other ones like Snapchat, Pinterest, TikTok, sort of being the new emerger right now, the audiences tend to skew much, much younger than what you would typically see perhaps on legacy media organizations, so like print or radio or television. So there is the potential to really tap into a growing new market and audience, which is why a lot of, I just think that there's so much potential in social media. So why tell stories on social? Well, I kind of alluded to it. There's a massive audience there. And I should say that as a journalist, I personally believe that there are 5 different ways that you can use social media, but we're really going to focus on just one of them, maybe a little bit of the second one, but we're focusing on storytelling and engagement for the most part. And I have a whole other presentation on the different ways you can use social media, which I will link to at the end in case you're interested in exploring those ideas as well. So to come back to why telling stories on social media, because there's the massive audience, it's where your future audience could be, and I really do believe that that content is king when it comes to presenting information on social. Like, you might have heard that we need to be on Facebook, we need to be where everybody else is, but I don't think it works if you are creating content that doesn't. Sorry, did somebody want to chime in? If you have a question, just put in the chat. I think that might be the easiest. What was I saying? Yeah, I think that it's tricky if you're trying to get someone to look at something on Facebook and Twitter and drive them somewhere else, to maybe turn on TV or radio or whatever. It's often better, in my view, if you can do it, if your financial revenue model allows for it, to actually just present your content on social media itself, because that way you're not forcing your viewers to move elsewhere. And even if you don't want to do that, social is still really great for growing brand awareness, and you can refer traffic from the social media channels back to your own and operated platforms. And I think that the social also gives a great opportunity to engage with your audiences and really hear what they have to say, what their concerns are, what their questions are, and be accountable and transparent to them. So with all that being said, now this is a little bit of journalism stuff here, but how do you tell stories on social? Well, you can repackage content from other media. So this could be stuff that maybe you've gathered for another purpose. You can sort of rejig it with a couple of tweaks to make it fit for social, or you can go out and plan and gather content and material specifically for social media, and then it's purpose built for that. So they're both options are available. At CBC, we do a mix of both. Organizations like BuzzFeed, for example, or AJ Plus, like I would say that a lot of their content is really repackaging what already exists on other social media channels, and they sort of repurpose it and make it great for social. And then there are other companies, like say, for example, like if you look at CNN or Washington Post or whatnot, they'll just create like completely brand new content for Snapchat Discover that only exists for that purpose. So there are many ways that you can do it, but what I will say is that each social media platform is different. So you can't just say that, oh, if you do something for Facebook, it'll also work for Twitter or Instagram or whatever. It's best to sort of really think about what's the story that you're trying to tell, where is the audience that you want to try and find to share the story with, and then be intentional about what it is that you do on that specific platform. Okie dokie, let's get into some examples. So I want to show you Instagram stories, because I really feel like this is one of the more easier but also more fun things that you can do on social media. And it might be easier to first see some examples and then go from there to explaining what the features are like. So hopefully the audience, the sound plays for these stories. Please let me know if you can't hear them. Here's the first one. This one doesn't have sound. And bear in mind that this story is really meant to be viewed on mobile. It's not really meant to be seen on desktop, but here we have it. And then you can swipe up and go to whatever link you have. Now that feature only exists for verified accounts that have the little blue check mark on Instagram, but what you can do is through your story link out to other content. So that is one example of Instagram stories. And what I particularly like about this particular story is a couple of things. One, it's not so obvious from using the desktop version, but in Instagram, which is mostly meant for mobile, what happens is when you tap, you'll get a little bit more information at a time being revealed about this person. So it's using some of Instagram's own features to tell the story. And you can also use other features like geotagging. So here I've geotagged Vancouver Island. You can sort of put in the locations that you are. You can also tag accounts or of journalists or people, brands that you want to include in your story. You can even do things like have quizzes and polls and GIFs on Instagram stories. And this entire thing was built using the Instagram stories functionality. So I didn't create this using any sort of like video editing tools. I just took a bunch of photos, put them together in this format, vertically cropped them, and added this text directly in the Instagram app. So it is super user friendly, and it is very straightforward to put together in my view. The right length is always an interesting question as well. I think that personally, from what I've seen, most people tend to drop off somewhere between the 3 to 10 points. So I think the sweet spot is roughly around 5 to 6 posts. But of course, every audience is different, every story is different. So, you know, you can kind of figure out what makes the most sense for you. The other thing that I think is interesting is that you can include audio, of course, but not everybody listens to Instagram stories with sound on. We know that most mobile users tend to watch most things on social media with sound off, the one exception being YouTube. So what you might want to do is if you have a great piece of audio, at least include the sound on emoji or sticker, which you can find within the Instagram app, or do what I've done here, which is subtitle it, which is also a really great way if you don't have a lot of photos, but you have really great, powerful quotes. This could be a great way to still be able to use Instagram stories. Come out of that. The other example that I want to share with you is one that our reporter did. So the previous example is something that you make after the fact. This is an example of something that you could do live as it's happening, and I can think of lots of great situations where you might be able to do something like this. I'm in fact planning to do one like this, the one that you're going to see with the cranberry harvest in BC, which is like a big deal. Anyways, I'll show you the examples, then you can kind of get a sense of what that looks like, if it will play. Okay, I apologize if you weren't able to hear the audio, but hopefully what is obvious through these stories is that I'm not relying on the audio to tell the story. So at any point, if you can't hear it, for like this, for example, we have some information at the top telling you what the story is. This is the reporter, this is what the story is. And then when you go here, you know, again, we've put on with text, basically explaining what this story is about. So I wouldn't rely on sound if you're making Instagram stories, but it is something that you want to think about, that you can, of course, include, but not everybody will be watching those with sound on. I did put the link for the Instagram stories in the chat, so you can feel free to look at it on your own time. And I am sorry, I'm not sure entirely why the audio is muffled, but that is where we are. Okay, I'm going to X out of that. And so to sum up, we were talking about what makes a good Instagram stories. Essentially, they're good for showing the process of reporting or whatever it is that you're doing. And they're also great for showing chronology. So for example, I'm planning to go do something on the cranberry harvest in BC in a couple of weeks. And so my plan is, hey, I put on my waders, I'm going in here, this is what it's like for me. And I'm not showing you the complete package thing that you might expect to see, you know, something that you'd see on TV, which is like the fully packaged item, but I'm showing you more like the process of it as it happens. Also with IG stories, I would say that selfie style works super well because that's what people are used to seeing there already. And I would say it doesn't need to be very polished as well, because again, it's just not what people see on this platform. Like, of course, you can put together highly polished pieces, but they don't need to be that. So yeah, so that's Instagram stories in a nutshell. And hopefully that made sense. Okay, the next example that I would like to show you is Facebook Live. And this is something that was really popular about 2 or 3 years ago. I would say that it still matters, but maybe just not as much. But of course, it depends on every audience is different. What Facebook Live is great for is that it lets you live stream from your phone, or if you have a camera and some other fancy equipment, you can make it look more fancy. But the point is you can go live from your phone pretty much anywhere where you have a Wi-Fi signal. And it's a great way to showcase the expertise of your reporters or the experts that you want to showcase. And it's essentially an opportunity to have a conversation and a dialogue with your audience. What I would say is that the best Facebook Lives are those that build anticipation. So they move up to a point where there's like a big finale or something, or that they're visually appealing throughout. So probably the most famous example of a Facebook Live that built anticipation was a couple of years ago. I can't remember which media organization it was, but they were just essentially putting elastic bands around a watermelon. And this just went on forever and forever just to see when this watermelon would finally cave and burst. People were just watching to see when this thing would happen, and so you're building anticipation. Another example, election nights, debate nights. Obviously CBC News will be live streaming those results because everybody wants to know which government has been elected. So Facebook Lives are a great opportunity to do something like that. The one example that I'd like to show you is from something that we did a few years ago. It's from the 420 marijuana event in Vancouver, and I don't know if you'll be able to hear the sound, but oops, I did not mean to do that. But what you'll hopefully be able to see is that if it plays, which okay, it's slowly thinking. What you can see. I'm going to reduce the volume here just in case so I can keep talking through it. Here's a reporter. She's at an event. She's talking to an expert, the person who's organized this event, and she's talking to another person here who is taking who's organized the rally, and then what we do is once we finish sort of interviewing our people, then we go and actually show them what the cool thing is that's happening. And at 4:20, at exactly 4:20 p.m., what happens is at this particular park in Vancouver, tons of people start smoking marijuana, and it's like this big smoke off. And so that's what we are building anticipation for. What you're seeing right now is the countdown as the rally organizers are sort of hyping up the crowd. And so what we've done in the Facebook Live is have an interview portion with somebody, show them something interesting, And the other piece is that I am engaging with the audience in the comments. So I'm going to switch over here to show you most relevant. And I think what will happen is, yeah, you can see CBC Vancouver here, that's me, writing as the brand account, you know, putting in links to relevant stories. Here, for example, I'm answering a question from someone who asked when this event was, and so I'm saying, hey, this event goes on all day. People asking how many people were there, I'm answering that. And so throughout this Facebook Live, I'm answering and engaging with our viewers in the comments. The other cool thing is that if people have questions that I might not necessarily know the answer to, I will also text them, or you know, like whatever method works, send them to the reporter in the field and say, hey, Victor wants to know this question. And so she will answer that question live through the Facebook live streaming app and directly on camera. And so audiences love that because they're like, oh, my question got selected, and then they get to present, and then they get to hear their name, and then they also get to hear the answer. So Facebook Lives, super popular. Would really recommend that if there is an opportunity that you feel like you can do this, it would be worthwhile doing. I mean, there's some things to consider, like, you know, what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if you're at a protest and it breaks out into sort of a more dangerous situation? Like, these are some of the things you might want to think through. But for the most part, Facebook Lives are just a really fantastic opportunity to go live from somewhere and really engage with your audiences. Okay. I'm sorry, I think there was a question, but I couldn't really hear you. Would you mind putting it in the chat, please? I'm gonna see if I can find where the chat is, because I seem to have moved that away. Okay, I've got the chat window back up. Excellent. If you have any questions, just please put them there. That would be great. Okay. The next example that I would like to show you is a Twitter thread. And this is the thing that I feel are probably familiar with, but I just wanted to show you some really effective examples of Twitter threads, because if they're done really well, they can be, you know, like a great way of getting your information out. And they're especially good because if you don't have a lot of visuals, which on social media, like the more prettier images you have, the better it will be. But if you don't have that, you know, Twitter is like a great place to go. So when I say Twitter thread or Twitter essay, what I really mean is by starting with the main tweet that sort of serves like a headline or the topic page. And then every tweet underneath that is either a reply to it, or you click the plus add tweet button, and then they're all grouped together in a collection. So if somebody comes on tweet number 5, they're not like, wait, what is this about? Like, they can just click on the link that says see this thread, and they can go back and find everything else in that is connected. So the example that I would like to show you is this one from BBC News Africa. I've never seen a Twitter thread that has been this amazing. I mean, it's kind of terrifying. The story is very serious, but it is an excellent example of a Twitter thread. So they start off with the word saying thread. They tell you that this horrifying video has begun to circulate on social media. And what they do then is explain how it is that they verified the veracity of this and whether or not it was fake news or real. And so what they're doing is through a bunch of tweets, they're explaining to you their process of journalism. They've got quotes, they've got videos, they've got maps, they've, you know, really built it out. So if there's something that you think that you can really sort of dissect and show in various steps, this is a fantastic example to showcase what it is that you're working on. The other example that I would like to show you is something that I made for a podcast, actually, that we had come out earlier this summer. It's about the Trans Mountain, it's about these endangered killer whales that live off the coast of BC. And of course, the Trans Mountain Pipeline is a huge deal for that, because people are concerned about increased tanker traffic. So what we did here was I found pieces of audio and put them together in a Twitter thread. So I'm not going to play it now because I think the sound is going to be muffled. Well, you know what? I'll play it. Hopefully you can hear it. And if not, I'll put the link in the chat so that you can look at it yourself. But essentially, the idea is that is what killer whales sound like in a quiet underwater environment, now contrasted to what happens when you have killer whales with a cruise ship. So if you listen to those two clips in isolation, or if you didn't see those tweets together in a Twitter thread, it might not make sense. Like, why am I telling you about this? But now you sort of see the story unfolding. So, okay, that's what happens. But why does it matter? So we've got this Orca researcher telling you now why underwater noise is such a concern for killer whales. Why does it matter? Well, it's because where these whales live and where the ships go through for the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion really overlap in terms of areas. So we built a map so you can compare the two, and swipe up to listen to our podcast. This is an example of how you can use Twitter threads to your advantage should you have the right thing to build there. Okay, I'm going to keep going ahead with our next example, and that is text on videos. So text on videos are, oops, did not mean to hit that button. I meant to hit this button. Okay. Text on videos are something that have become really popular in the last 3 to 5 years, I would say. 3 to 5? No, like 3 to 4 years, really. And the reason for that is that we know that both Facebook and Twitter's algorithms like videos far more than they like link posts. So if you have a link to a web story or event that you want to promote, chances are that if you can somehow create a video around it, it will reach far more people than if you just had a link post. Now, of course, there are exceptions to every rule, but videos generally tend to do much better. The other reason why it's text on videos is because, as I mentioned before, most viewers watch videos with the sound off. When you're sitting on the bus, you're taking transit, chances are you don't have sound on. What text and videos are really good for is sort of telling bite-sized pieces of information. So listicles, news of the day, and we tend to keep them really short at CBC, I would say, somewhere between 35 seconds to under a minute is what I would generally recommend, because people don't tend to watch much longer than that for text on videos. So I will show you an example of what a text on video looks like for something that we created. Okay, don't want to see a dog video, so I'm going to move that out of the way. Essentially, what I would say with text on videos, oops, I'll go back one, is that I find that they are very shareable. And the best way to think about them is if you can tell the story in about 30 to 40 seconds, you've had it. And the way I encourage my writers to frame them is, how would you tell the story to somebody who you were standing next to on the elevator on? Like, don't get too wrapped up in it, just like tell it quickly. And that's a great way to put them together. Now, the version that you saw, we put that together using video editing software, but there are tons of free tools available that you can, if you have the video, like you've shot it on your iPhone, there are tools that you can use to add text using your phone. Like, you do not need expensive software to make this happen. iMovie, for example, lets you do this. There are apps on Android as well that you can use to edit text on videos. They might not look as slick as the one that I showed you, but they will get the job done. So there are lots of free tools out there that I would experiment with. But if you are willing or have access to the tools, I would say things like Adobe Premiere are really great for putting together text on videos. The last example, is it the last example? Let me check. No, not the last example. Sorry, another presentation that I was thinking of where this was the last example is an AMA. Now, Reddit is a social media platform that maybe not a lot of people are thinking about in terms of storytelling, and it's not really storytelling, it's more engagement. But what Reddit lets you do is showcase the expertise of your reporting team or the people who represent your brand. And it really puts you in front of your audience and just answer whatever questions they have. And the thing that makes it unique is that if you don't have the capacity to gather a lot of visuals, Reddit is all text-based, so it works out. And the specific thing that I have in mind for Reddit is AMAs. So an AMA stands for Ask Me Anything. These are really, really popular on Reddit. And the idea is that you go into a subreddit. So in this case, we're going into the Vancouver subreddit. That's what it says for our Vancouver right here. And you say, hey, I'm an Indigenous reporter at CBC Vancouver. I've covered this issue for more than a decade. Ask me anything. People will put in all of their questions that you can see all around here, and then I'm scrolling too fast, sorry. You can see all the questions that are coming in, and then the reporter has answered questions at a specific time frame. So she said, I helped her put this post together. She put the post up like 2 or 3 days before, but then on a specific date and time, which she announced on the Reddit page, that she will be there from 12:30 to 1:30 answering questions, so she did that. We've done this a couple of times now at CBC. We've done this with our meteorologist who was asking questions about just like anything about meteorology. We've done it with our municipal affairs reporter. He did it the day before the election. So I've been on the campaign trail for 6 months. Ask me anything you want. We're doing another AMA with the reporters who worked on this podcast called Sanctioned. It is about the arrest of the Huawei executive in Vancouver and what all of the implications are for Canadian politics, international relations between the United States and China, the entry of 5G into Canada, all of those sorts of things. So they're doing a podcast on that. So we're doing an AMA saying, hey, like, she's back in court this week, ask us anything you want on this particular case. And I have to say, like, you have to be open-minded that you might get any kind of questions. So for one of the AMAs that we did, somebody asked us, like, this person who works at CBC and is on air, they kind of look grumpy. Are they actually grumpy? So like sometimes you like, I mean, you can choose whether or not to answer them, but you know, really ask me anything is kind of ask me anything. So that is an AMA. Okay, the other examples that I will like to show you are from YouTube. YouTube is quite different from all the other social media platforms in that it's more immersive. Most of the other ones like Instagram stories, Twitter, Facebook, people want quick digestible pieces and then they want to get out. Reddit is one where you can have, you know, significantly meaningful discussions back and forth with your audiences, but YouTube is really the place for telling long form video storytelling, and they can be quite popular and have more sort of an evergreen tail. So where if you're thinking of making like a text on video, that's sort of like more like this is happening now, whereas YouTube, I would encourage you to think about things that you could maybe come back and share again and again and again, because people will find them through searching pieces like that. So I will share the links in the chat in case you can't hear them. So here is the first one. I'll put the sound up so you can hear it. So this is something that we did for Pride. It was part of our Pride coverage. We had this very smart young person come in, and 16-year-old, I think they are, and they talked about what it's like to be non-binary, because we were getting a lot of questions around that. So this was their opportunity, sort of first person to be able to explain what it's like in their own terms. So that is one example of like a longer piece that you can do on YouTube. This one's like 1:45. The other example that I would like to show you is again from the Killer Whale podcast that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So hopefully that gives you a sense. I won't make you watch the entire video, but that gives you a sense of what it's like to be able to create on YouTube. And what I would say is that when you're thinking about what might be a good, whatchamacallit, YouTube sort of explainer to make, go into Google and type in literally why is whatever the thing that you're interested in, and see what Google auto completes it into, because that will give you a really good insight into seeing what other people are searching for. And then you can create a video around that subject, so sort of like a question that people want to know the answer to, and then you can create the video from that point of view. So yeah, that would be YouTube. So those are the examples that I would wanted to share with you. And to wrap up, what I would like to do is sort of summarize what are some factors to consider when telling stories on social media. So I showed you a whole bunch of different ranges of different platforms that you can be on. And what I would say is really think about which one is the best platform for reaching your audience. Not all of them are equal. Some of them are text-based, some of them are more visual-based, some of them require vertical content, some of them are more horizontal. So depending on how you are gathering your content, what you have access to, you know, different platforms can have different results. And also, where is your audience? Like if you are trying to reach younger folks, maybe you should be thinking about Instagram stories. If you're looking for a slightly older demographic, well, that's Facebook. So, you know, really think about what story are you trying to tell and what serves it best. Is it news-based or is it more evergreen and featurey? What's the length of time that you want to tell your story in, and actually how much time do you also have to create these, because there are different degrees of involvement for all of these. Do you want to engage with your audience, in which case maybe something like Reddit or Facebook Live is better. What resources do you have? Do you have access to your camera? Do you have access to editor? And it's at the end of the day, sort of what's your goal? I think that is sort of the driving thrust of which platform one should be on when telling stories on social, rather than saying, I always need to be on this platform. I think it makes more sense to serve the story rather than that you're trying to share, rather than trying to serve a platform. So yeah. So the main takeaway that I'm hoping you will all have is that each of these platforms have their own unique storytelling opportunities and downsides, and it's best to be intentional. Whether you're repurposing content from elsewhere, or whether you are gathering specifically for telling stories on social, it's just best to be intentional. If you know what you're trying to do, it will turn into a great product. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, that if you're interested in learning more about how you can use any one of these platforms, like you're more interested in diving specifically into Instagram stories or text on videos, you can check out this playlist, which I will link in the presentation and I'll put in the chat as well. And you can see more specific details about all of them. And that's it for my presentation. So at this point, if you have any questions, I am happy to take them, and I see a bunch of them coming in the chat, so I will go through them. Feel free to put more in. Okay. Question from Mike. If marketers, publicists, and journalists all use the same social media strategies to create content, is there still a clear definition between these professions? You know, that's a really great question, and something that often comes up in my work at CBC. And to be honest, I'm not sure from an audience point of view if they know the difference, or even care about the difference between what marketing teams can do or publicists can do and what journalists can do. And that's kind of why I said at the start that content is king. If you're putting out great content, people will gravitate towards it and find it and share it and do whatever it is they need to do with it. I do believe, though, that there are some key differences, mainly that I personally don't feel like a lot of marketers and publicists are necessarily trying to keep people on social media. And this is just my point of view. I mean, I could be totally wrong in terms of what other folks are doing, but I find that they're generally trying to send that person from looking at something that's happening on social to somewhere else. Whereas what I'm saying is keep them on that platform, because that's where they are. So just leave them there. So I think that might be, at least in terms of the content, a different approach that we have. In terms of the professional work that you're doing, I would say that, journalists, we are governed by, even those who on social media are governed by the same principles of fair and balanced reporting versus advocating for one point of view or advocating for one brand, right? So when I'm creating these stories, I'm thinking about how am I bringing in other perspectives? How am I telling a balanced story? And so those are some of the things that I think distinguishes it. But again, as I said, I'm not sure the audience necessarily knows or cares about those differences. So I hope that answers your question, Mike. Question from Suzanne. These platforms are great for storytelling, but is there a way to use them to generate revenue? Yes and no. And I'll be honest and say that I'm not the best person to answer questions about generating revenue. Partially, it has to do with the privileged position that I am in working at CBC, where we do not have those same considerations, at least working on the editorial journalism side of our corporation, thinking about those things. We focus on the journalism, and the rest just follows. What I can say is that there are opportunities to generate revenue, and honestly, like there are resources out there, but I don't necessarily know what they are. I mean, I know, for example, that you can send out, I didn't show an example of this, but newsletters to me are part of social media storytelling or social media applications, because you can get people to essentially subscribe to your service if you have great information out there. So that's like one sort of indirect way of generating revenue. The other way would be you can get folks to sign up for you know, like if you're a verified account on Instagram, you can put ads that way. And when you're creating these ads, I would say that, you know, think about the same principles that I mentioned here. I mean, even if it's not journalistic, you know, you can get people to drive to certain things and subscribe for things that way. Rambly answer, but that's mainly because this is not my area of expertise. I'm more comfortable with taking people who are on the platform and hopefully turning them into return viewers who are loyal and sticking with us. So building loyalty as opposed to building revenue. So I'm sorry I'm not able to fully answer your question, but I do know there are ways to generate revenue. I just don't know what they are. Okay, I'm going to scroll up. Wendy's asking, you were going to add the link to the URL on that final slide. Yes, I will put that in right now so that you can see it. So the playlist, here we go. Okay, this is the playlist, which you can see at your own. I'm going to put that away. So this is the links to that, and I will also make my presentation available. I'm just going to change the privacy so that anyone on who has a link can view it, and then I will put the presentation link in the chat as well, so that if you wanted to review any of these examples later on, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So there we go. I put that in. Okay. Thank you, Wendy, for that reminder. Ivor is asking, what are your thoughts regarding using clips from a main story as posts to drive traffic back to the main story or blog or video? Should social only be spontaneous? Excellent question. I didn't show an example of this, but what we do have is this is a tool that that we frequently use at CBC. So sometimes on radio, well, not sometimes, often on radio, we'll have a very long interview that is about 20 minutes long or something like that, and that's hard to share on social, because 20 minutes of audio with nobody, like it's not dynamic video, like audio generally does not share well on social. So what we've been able to do is isolate maybe like a 30-second or 1-minute clip, which is super interesting, super shareable, like sort of like the moment from the interview, and we'll create what we call an audio snap, which is essentially like that 30-second video with one photo, and the transcription is there, and we share that on Twitter, and then we link that, and we link that thing saying, if you want to listen to the whole interview, check it out here. So we frequently pick the most interesting moment and use it to drive traffic back to our main story. And so social be only as spontaneous. I mean, I think that social should be spontaneous and fun, but the reality is that almost everything that I do is planned, executed with thought, especially towards ensuring journalistic balance and editorial considerations. So hopefully people still find it spontaneous and share our content. But for the most part, no, I think we've moved past the idea that social is something that you do sort of like dumb in the moment, you know, and can be something that really there's an opportunity to think about it as a powerful example of storytelling. I plugged my own thing. Okay. Steph says, thank you for your presentation. Well, thank you for listening. What have you seen that works really well for encouraging engagement among your audience? Some tips for Twitter specifically. I think there are a lot of really great tools for engagement out there. It sort of depends on your goal, but what I find works really well on Twitter is Twitter polls. So one of our reporters, Justin McElroy, was sort of created this bracket on his own, looking at what would be Vancouver's most iconic building, and he created a multi-Twitter thread that was like letting people choose between two buildings, and eventually sort of like you work your way up through the bracket through, like, I think he whittled down some like 40 buildings and eventually got to the one winner. And so it got a lot of momentum. And so that's just one example of a Twitter poll. We've done so many others, and that is really I feel like for Twitter, polls are a really great way to get engagement. For Instagram stories, what I would say is quizzes are a really great opportunity as well. And I didn't share an example of that, but what it lets you do is, in any subject that maybe you've put a lot of time and effort into, and you want to find another way to give that content extended shelf life, a great way to do that is a quiz on social, specifically Instagram stories. So I would consider that as well. And the other thing I would say for engagement is to give people specific instructions. So with a Facebook Live, we'll say, thanks for joining. Please put your questions in the comments below. So then people know that we're asking them to do that. Whereas I think if you just send out a question saying, what are your thoughts on XYZ, people don't tend to respond. Like, I think like you need to really spell it out for them. I want to know what your thoughts are on XYZ. Please tweet at me or send me an email. And the more specific you are in your call to action, the more likely it is that you will get engagement. And Reddit. Reddit is the other place that I would really encourage you to go if you're interested in engagement. All right, Anne Fisher, what about blogs? Are they history? Are they not considered social? I mean, blogs to me are not history, although perhaps not, well, I mean, I don't know in terms of how popular they are. But what I would say is it depends on how, like, what are you using them in terms of social content. Like if you are looking for a way to just keep it as a record of your thoughts, I don't know if that is social, because where is the engagement in that? Where are you necessarily interacting with the audience in that sense? So, that all comes down to what your definition of social is. What I would say is that maybe consider moving to Medium, because that seems to be a really popular blogging platform, and maybe do Twitter threads, because that could be a really effective way of, same thing, providing a stream of consciousness or a point of view, but it is on a platform that other people are on, rather than necessarily trying to get them to come to your blog. But yeah, I mean, I would say if you have an audience, keep going at it. Like, I mean, maybe consider adding on another platform. Hope that answers your question. Natalie, thank you. Ivor's asking, do I decide all that in a story meeting? I'm assuming that you're talking about what it is that I'm doing on the social media platform. And yeah, before I go out to any event that or story that we intend to cover, we usually have a planning meeting. We talk about which platforms the story makes the most sense to tell it on. Like, is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is it this? Is it that? And once we figured out what that is, then we actually storyboard things in advance. So I mean, I as a journalist, I don't know exactly what people will say, but I have a sort of inkling, like, okay, we know that we need, for example, if it was the story about the SkyTrains that I showed you on Instagram stories, it's like, well, we know we need a clip from our expert saying why SkyTrain, why the noise on the transit system it can be an issue. So okay, we've got that sorted out. We know we need an intro. We know we need an extra. We need to have one shot where you can see just how noisy the trains can get on the decibel meter. So there's certain key moments that we know we've planned for, but then other things we're sort of open-minded to whatever it is that comes up, and we pivot as necessary. But certainly the platform and the expectations and the resourcing and planning is done a lot in advance as much as possible, with the exception of course breaking news, which you kind of just go as you can. And yeah, so I think that is it for the questions, and it is we're just about ready to wrap up as well. So if you have any more questions in the last like 3 minutes, let me know. Otherwise, my email is there as well. Happy to answer any questions that you have and keep the conversation going. This is something that I'm really, really passionate about, and I hope you all found it useful and helpful. I'm just going to watch the chat to see if Ashley, who helped me organize all of this, has anything else to add. And Wendy's asking, did you post that, Earl? Yes, I did. I will directly respond to you, Wendy, so that you can see that as well. 1 second. And I will also send it to you. 1 second. I hope everybody else sees it, but if not, I will put it in here one more time.
As we're wrapping up, I just want to say thank you to Tamara for taking the time tonight to come on for this webinar, and just let everyone know that we will be sending the recording out by email to everyone that participated tonight and everyone that registered. So watch for that before the end of the week.
Thank you.